Welcome to our second keynote presentation. To kick it off, a few words from AAM board member and 2021 and 2022 National Program Committee Chair, Nathan Ritchie.
Hi, my name is Nathan Ritchie. I'm the director of the Golden History. Hi, my name is Nathan Ritchie. I'm the director of the Golden History Museum and Park here in beautiful Golden, Colorado. I'm also an AAM board member and the chair of the National Program Committee in 2021 and 2022. I've had the pleasure of leading this committee in the reviewing and selection of sessions for this annual conference. The committee, which was comprised of nearly 50 professionals from around the country, had the opportunity to select this wonderful educational program based entirely on the needs and concerns of the museum profession. I want to thank the many people who have spent so much time and dedication in preparing and presenting their content and sessions, and we'll be picking again soon for the 2022 meeting here within the next couple of weeks. So after 2 years of being virtual, I know we're incredibly excited to see each other in person in Boston next year in 2022. Enjoy the rest of your conference and thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, for your leadership on this year's National Program Committee. Next, we will recognize another AAM Board of Directors Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion awardee. Janice Majewski, Director of Inclusive Cultural and Educational Projects at the Institute of Human-Centered Design, is this year's recipient of the AAM DEAI Inclusion Award for Individuals. We salute her for her groundbreaking work on inclusive design and unwavering commitment to cultivating accessibility and inclusion in the museum field. We will now hear from Janice.
Individual Award for DEAI, and for emphasizing the imperative for inclusion in museums today and recognizing the vital role that people with disabilities play in making museums more diverse, equitable, accessible, and inclusive. Thank you also to the Institute for Human-Centered Design and specifically Executive Director Valerie Fletcher for supporting my work in the cultural sector and allowing me to learn from my wise colleagues. Finally, and most importantly, my enormous gratitude goes to the people who taught me how to advocate for accessibility, my coworkers, friends, and family with disabilities, who generously shared their essential voices and expertise in this work. I stood on the shoulders of giants like Irma Shore, Alice Kenny, Deborah Sonnenstrahl-Blumenson, and Beth Seabarth. My hope is that professionals new to the field will find something in my 40-plus year career and the extraordinary ongoing input from museum visitors, staff, advisors, volunteers, and board members, all with disabilities, that will guide their efforts into the future. The immediate objective and long-term goal are to design museums that offer integrated, not separate and unequal, engagement and enjoyment for our present and future diverse audience. 61 million Americans with disabilities, 1 billion people with disabilities worldwide. All of us will truly benefit. Thank you.
Congratulations, Janice. Now, a special introduction of today's keynote presentation from Chicago-based Erica Vasquez, a student, followed by Carlos Tortolero, founder and president of the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago. Carlos will then join our keynote speaker in conversation after the video.
Hi everyone, my name is Erica Vasquez. I'm a student at Eric Solorio Academy High School in Chicago. I have the wonderful opportunity of introducing the great writer Sandra Cisneros today. When I was first introduced to Cisneros' literature, I was so excited to learn that we share a very similar story. I also grew up and the only daughter among brothers a daughter of immigrant parents, born and raised in Chicago and constantly moving back and forth from Mexico. Growing up in Chicago is especially hard for youth today, facing challenges from poverty to violence, as written by Cisneros and experienced by many of us. It is important for our educators to inspire us to dream big and set goals, and I am especially appreciative of them for exposing us to great role models like Cisneros in the classroom. Cisneros inspires my classmates and I to dream big of the life outside of the streets of Chicago and pursue our passions. Please join me in welcoming Sandra Cisneros.
Thank you, Erica, for that wonderful, wonderful words about Sandra, who's really an amazing person. You know, if one talked about all of Sandra's accomplishments, we'll be here until next year. But I would like to mention one in particular, the fact that she was awarded the National Medal of Arts from Obama, and I think, you know, President Obama, and that was a tremendous honor for all of us across the country and in Chicago and all the fans about Sandra, because she is such a wonderful person and has been a great inspiration to so many people, not only my community, but across all the communities in the United States. Sandra, there's a great story I'd like to tell before we start. You know, you came here about 5 years ago, and instead of having your, you know, a book presentation, you signed books. And I remember the line lasted 5 hours. And what was interesting, and it went all the way outside of our museum, all the way down the street, down the block. But what's interesting is people weren't talking, they were reading your books. They were all reading your books. And they don't hold your book, they like, you know, caress it, cuddle it, embrace it. It really is amazing. What is it in your books that you think really inspire these people so much and have them care so much about the words you write on paper or on your computer? Sandra?
Can you hear me, Carlos? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. First,
Louder.
louder. Okay, I want to say that Erika me trajo lágrimas. I wiping tears away. She was so great, and I loved her political wardrobe, because art and politics and fashion all blend together, and she knows that, and she's so young. So brava, Erika. Beautiful introduction. I don't know. I'm just here to serve, and I was the shyest young girl when I was Erika's age, and the fact that you're allowing me
Need to be louder. Louder.
Okay,
Louder.
the fact that I'm going to shout. The fact that you're allowing me to speak is a great honor. I'm going to try to see if I can raise this. I'm not wearing a mic because we were
It's better. It's better. It's better.
Is that better? Okay,
Yes.
I'm going to get close so I can do this. All right, let me start because I have about a 30-minute speech and I want to leave enough time for you and I to speak, Carlos.
Right.
Okay? Okay, vámonos. And this is my musings on museums. And when I publish it, it'll be a little longer. This is the short version. Often, I get an urge to call my mother. Then I remember my mother is 14 years dead. It's been a long time, but I still feel my mother tugging my heart daily like a marlin reeling at the end of a line. When she was alive, my mother began her phone calls the same way. After I'd said, hello, she would ask, what? And I would have to answer, but Ma, you're the one who called me. Now when I get these intuitive urges to call my mother, I realize it's my mother trying to contact me. Okay, I get it. This is for Elvira Vera Cordero Anguiano. The story begins with Vera as a girl paying her sister to do her chores. Where did a girl during the Depression get any money? Returning soda bottles, collecting cans, selling used comic books? Solo Dios, only God knows. Then she would climb out the window of her apartment on South Peoria Street in Chicago and run off to visit a museum. This Vera, my mother, was the daughter of Mexican immigrants who could neither read nor write in English or Spanish until they were elderly. My mother was a poor girl from a poor neighborhood who attended a poor school. But when she played hooky from her weekend chores, she marched from her humble barrio, Roosevelt Road and Halsted Street, to the glamorous lakefront with its Greco-Roman museums. Lucky for her, she was born in Chicago, city of world-class museums. And when she grew up, she took her 7 children to museums almost every weekend ever after. Not for our sake, but for her own. I wonder if these museums realized they prevented my mother from having a nervous breakdown, saved her marriage, and gave my exhausted parents respite for a few hours. My disgruntled mother and overworked father took us to museums weekly, not because they were trying to educate us, but because they needed museums more than we did. And with 7 kids, free admission on Sundays was a big draw, especially on windy winter days. What was my mother searching for on those visits? My parents were spiritual but not religious. We were never obligated to attend Mass. Instead, on Sundays, we attended museums. Father, woozy after a week of spitting tacks and stretching fabric over sofas and chairs, was allowed to park himself in the museum entrance hall and satisfy his favorite hobby, people watching. Siempre fue muy fisgón. He was always nosy. And so we didn't feel too guilty abandoning Father in the museum atrium. But what about Mother? These outings fortified Mother for another week of being our mother, I suspect. Maybe they brought back the dreams she had of doing something with her life before she got drafted into motherhood. She loved and knew the Chicago museums well, the Science and Industry, the Shedd Aquarium, the Art Institute, the Garfield Park Conservatory, the Lincoln Park and Brookfield Zoos, the Field Museum. As a kid, she had loved spooking herself by visiting the mummies in the basement of the Field Museum. And as kids, we too loved scaring ourselves in that same dark basement. Without knowing it, our weekly visits to the museums as children planted seeds in each of us for our future lives. One of my brothers is a doctor, one an artist, one musician, one a geologist, and even my younger brothers who inherited my father's upholstery business have a great appreciation and love of museums to this day. We are, as a result of my mother's hunger, hungry for museums ourselves. Now that I am no longer a starving artist, I can afford the nourishment of museum membership. And recently, I have surprised myself by becoming a philanthropist through art donations made to the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago. This is astonishing to me, considering I began my life in a house with no bedroom doors and linoleum on the floor. I think about Jean-Michel Basquiat. His Puerto Rican mother took him to museums when he was a 5-year-old, just as our mother took us to museums before we knew how to read. Like our mother, Basquiat's mom loved fashion and the arts, and that passion for museum was transferred to her son, who dropped out of school at 17, but transferred his subsequent education to the halls of the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Metropolitan Museum. But I promised you musings on museums, so let me muse and amuse you. When I was visiting Taipei recently as a guest of the American School, I visited the National Palace Museum. One of the most celebrated objects in their collection is a Chinese cabbage carved from jade. The day I went, a mob was crowding around to take pictures with their phones as aggressively as if meeting Beyonce. They were more concerned about capturing the jade cabbage on their iPhones instead of looking at the real one. I could hardly get close enough to see the jade cabbage myself. In the end, I took pictures of the tourists taking pictures of the cabbage. And to me, that was even more remarkable than meeting a famous cabbage. And I wonder why someone didn't tell them about the gift shop postcards. Or did they have to own the cabbage, take a selfie with the cabbage, brag and say, hey, we're close friends, the cabbage and me? What is it about iPhones and museums? Maybe someone out there can tell me. In the same city, Taipei, across town from the National Palace, there exists another museum I was lucky enough to find through my introduction to Taiwanese author-writer Brenda Lin. When she found out I am a devotee of textiles, she shared with me her mother's extraordinary collection of handmade children's clothing housed in the offices of her parents' children's clothing company. The Christy Lan Lin collection of Chinese children's textiles is a testament to one woman's passion for collecting. Brenda's mom has managed to preserve and display a stunning and vast array of children's clothing from Taiwan, southwestern China, and Southeast Asia, and it is no less lovingly presented than the objects in the National Palace Museum, in my opinion, with the added benefit of not having to fight the paparazzi. Brenda told me that the pieces were purchased for the most part from the makers, and this was especially moving to me. What woman had constructed these little dragon shoes, and who had worn them once? So much love and labor had gone into this baby's bib. Did the girl who once wore this velvet jacket grieve that she could no longer inherit it to give to her own child? Why are these exquisite baby carriers no longer made? Personal collections like these are fascinating, and I regret I never got to meet the curator collector herself, as she was not in town that afternoon I visited, but her collection inspires me to return to Taipei one day. I don't know about you, but I am especially ambivalent about museums glorifying políticos. And so, when I dropped by the Eva Perón Museum in Buenos Aires, I was a bit skeptical, though I have no strong feelings for or against her, but more of a curiosity of the strange story of her life. It is a haphazard museum with odd displays of items that weren't exactly hers, and a fierce fanaticism evident by its curators that made me resistant to persuasion. But then one installation suddenly seduced me. An empty room, big enough to dance in, bathed in a twilight light with silhouettes of a crowd along the wall, and the soundtrack of a bandoneon playing a tango, embellished by the roar of a crowd. Was Evita passing in a parade? Was it her funeral procession? I can't remember exactly, but what I can't forget is the emotion the room gave me. I was swept away by the enthusiastic shouts of El Pueblo and the tango music and transported to another place, another time. It was pure theater, and it made me understand something of the ineffable Evita mystique after all. I was not a fan of Andy Warhol either until by chance I was invited to give a reading in Pittsburgh in 2017. While there, I was escorted to the Warhol Museum and given a personal tour of the exhibit Stars of the Silver Screen by its excellent curator, Geraldine Huxley. The show beautifully connected Warhol's early fascination with Hollywood movie stars and how this obsession transformed itself later into his portraits of the rich and famous. Since I love old movies, I had a wonderful time. An added surprise was a room that reproduced Andy Warhol's Silver Clouds installation, breaking the restrictions of just viewing objects and allowing us to play, to move within the space of the floating mylar pillows and be a part of the art. It was something like attending your own birthday party as a kid, only more fun. Finally, a photo booth where you could take your own portrait was also an extra perk I didn't expect to find in a museum. Here, it was installed in homage to Warhol's photo booth self-portraits. I love photo booth selfies too, and it was a great way to have a souvenir to take home from your museum visit without pulling out your iPhone. I like the Paris Louvre because of all the bad art that makes the good art just jump out at you and say, look at me. You can yawn through several halls, and then when you get to a truly great piece of art, you don't need anyone to tell you it's good. It makes me wonder why they don't have a garage sale and get rid of the junk, though maybe the snoozers are all part of the overall plan. I wonder who bought the stuff and who dumped it on them. And this makes me think about how some museums must inherit a lot of things they wish they could regift. The Edith Piaf Museum is the opposite of the Louvre. 2 small rooms in the Belleville apartment of the owner, curator, superfan. The coolest thing is that Edith once lived there, but I think the owner, curator, superfan still thinks she does. I don't remember anything except how sad and sorry I felt being there, like someone had just finished crying, and how relieved I was to get outside. Sometimes the ghost of someone who lived there is all you need to make a space special. I like Frida Kahlo's Casa Azul Museum, though often so many of her paintings are on loan to other museums. Still, I have been there several times, and there is something mysteriously alluring about spaces you have studied in black and white photos. It's the energy a place leaves you with, yet something at the same time is airless and dead about this house. I like the recent show when a stash of her stuff was uncovered in a sealed room. The dresses and used tubes of lipstick, her plaster corset, her prosthetic with the embroidered silk shoe, her empty Revlon nail polish bottles. These items remind us of the real people who lived here once and gave the house its animal. If I was a curator, I would add a bit of black hair on the hairbrush next to the bathroom sink, or a pair of squashed house slippers on the side of the bed, or maybe a robe hanging on a hook behind a door, something to give the house back its former life. The Frida Kahlo Appearances Can Be Deceiving exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum in 2019 was very different than the one I saw at the Museo Frida Kahlo in 2012, curated by Circe Enestrosa, though several of the same items appeared in both. And I should mention, as well as the Victoria and Albert Museum in London show, and I regret I didn't travel overseas to see that one. But I traveled to the Brooklyn Museum show. I wanted to see how Frida was explained to non-Mexicans. I liked both the Casa Azul and the Brooklyn show for different reasons. The Casa Azul for its power of place, and the Brooklyn Museum of Art for explaining in detail the cultural and historical times of Frida's world to those unfamiliar with Mexican culture. And I went dressed in a Tehuana, which is, this is a Tehuana blouse from the region of Isthmus of Tehuantepec. And I was mistaken for a docent because I was explaining so much to my niece and nephew who went with me. And I posed with several museum goers who loved what I was wearing and they thought was a costume, but they were just my clothes. The Detroit Institute of Arts, Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo in Detroit in 2015 was especially moving because the viewers talked with one another, with me, strangers, about what we were seeing. Women of all ages and color were so deeply moved by Frida's stark portrait of her mother giving birth to her that we had to talk. We'd never seen anything like that in art history before. And Rivera's portraits of Black people also drew comments from the Black patrons who I don't think they expected to see themselves portrayed in a Mexican painter's art. It was the first time I'd been to an art museum where the visitors discussed the art they were viewing with one another, even though we were strangers. But I grieve to this day that I couldn't catch the lecture by Aiden Herrera, the Kahlo biographer, the next evening. I had to fly home. The Anne Frank Museum is both a writer's house and a museum. It is the most emotional museum of any home museum I visited, perhaps because they had the good sense to just leave it be. The magazine photos and postcards on the walls, the pencil indications of her growth. It's just heartbreaking, and you understand the fear and terror of the residents by how small and claustrophobic the space makes you feel, and of course, knowing the tragic end. The Emily Dickinson Museum in Amherst now grants 1 and 2 hour sessions for visitors who seek private time in Emily's bedroom for inspiration, contemplation, and possibly to channel her genius. I think I would be too afraid to be in that room alone with Emily, but I am also too afraid to miss out. When I was there on the first and only time, I took a Peter Pan bus from Boston and was delighted I was finally on my way to meet Miss Emily. After the house tour, I hung around the garden and sat there looking up at Emily's window, just waiting for a sign, a little puff of a shadow, a curtain pinched back, a bird, anything. I was desperate and waited, as Emily would put it, an eternity. Then I had to catch my Peter Pan bus back to Boston. But because I would not stop for Emily, she would not stop for me. This reminds me of the cross-pollination that went on at the New York Botanical Garden with its show on Emily Dickinson's garden. What an ingenious idea. My hat's off to whoever thought of that one. I missed that show and I regret it still. The former home of Isabella Stewart Gardner, a Nolime Tangere Museum, was given a breath of fresh air through the creativity of curator Jill Medvedow, who invited several artists back in 1995 to write about an item in the collection as part of a series titled Eye of the Beholder. I was one of the invited artists, and you can see the full essay, Tapicero's Daughter, in A House of My Own, my book of essays. This venture helped to bring visitors back to a museum that is not allowed to move or alter the original collection, and it allowed me to write about something I might not have otherwise, the way working class people might view a fancy house museum like Isabella's. It's interesting how one man's treasure is another woman's junk. My friend, Texas writer John Philip Santos, was all a Twitter about the Museum of the Americas in Madrid and insisted I had to go there, and I did, but I could find nothing there that made me swoon. I felt as if I was visiting some wealthy old gent's curio cabinet from a few centuries back. I despaired I had wasted my day until I stepped outside. Across the street, I could see there was something called El Museo del Traje, or the Garment Museum, and I dashed over there as fast as my cowboy boots could carry me. I was not disappointed. It's a sizzling museum that not only promenades you through the history of fashion, but invites you to play. After hours examining incredible textiles behind glass in dimly lit rooms, I stumbled upon a salon that housed a runway where you were invited to strut your stuff like a fashion model. Needless to say, I pranced. The International Museum of the European Puebla had a show in 2016 on the Manila galleons that voyaged from China to the Philippines to Mexico, then on to Guatemala and Peru, and which was especially interesting to me as I am interested in the confluence of migrations to Mexico from Asia of goods and people and language that make up who I am. When I visited China for a book tour, I wore my embroidered Tehuana blouse, which I suspected was connected to Chinese silk embroidery, since I knew of the trade between Mexico and the Philippines. And this show in Puebla confirmed a thread that did exist between Mexico and Asian fabrics. I was piqued to see at the show a statue of the Virgen de Guadalupe made in China. I'm always amazed at the ingenuity and industry of the Chinese, who have superseded the Mexicans in creating goddesses then and now. Nowadays, if you go to the Mexican markets, plenty of Guadalupe merchandise is made in China, including the fabulous fuzzy blankets that create electricity when you lift them. The Chicago Art Institute, conveniently located across the street from where I worked while a student, allowed me to explore my favorite artists that pop up in my writing even now. This museum also gave me an opportunity to see films alone in a clean, safe space, which for a sheltered girl like me was a revelation. I had never gone to the movies alone before, and this encouraged me to venture forth and see more films alone, a big deal if you're a Mexican girl. The Morton Arboretum in Chicago first introduced me to the work of Patrick Dougherty, who creates magical sculptures made from branches and saplings that are big enough for you to walk through. I was smitten when I first stepped inside them and lucky enough to catch Dougherty's work again in his hometown at the University of Carolina, Chapel Hill, several years later at the University Museum. I even wrote him a fan letter and offered to write something for him, but he must have thought I was una loca because he never wrote back. Some of my favorite exhibits are ones I didn't get to see. By chance, I happened to be in Toledo, Ohio, and ventured over to the Toledo Art Museum. A new exhibit was going up in a few days, but I wouldn't be in the city long enough to catch the opening. I bought at least the book in the gift shop. It was British artist Rebecca Louise Law's installation of dried plants and flowers. Unforgettable. I went home and created dried flower installations of my own afterwards in an attempt to paint the air as she does. I have at this moment an installation of dried marigolds in the next room. And I was thinking yesterday I should pick up my computer and walk you over so you can see it, but I'm afraid we'll get disconnected so you can see the photo in the published version of this talk. I'm aware how difficult the pandemic has been for museums financially, but might there be a way to invest in future museum goers by having a family day on Sunday that is free occasionally, monthly perhaps, that would not humiliate visitors with a suggested price, but rather would be free for all families that day. Think of it as an investment in the future Basquiat and Cisneros, future museum members and philanthropists. An occasional school field trip isn't enough. And also, let me add here, a suggested price is no good because people who cannot pay it are ashamed to be unable to pay the suggested price and will turn around and go home. I know, because I've done that. Why would you invite someone to your house and make them feel ashamed? Houses should make you feel welcome. And what are museums if not houses? I would also like to see more diversity in those who make suggestions about museum acquisitions and exhibits to prevent all about me museums or snooze museums or I didn't know was stolen museums. We would do well to invite others and listen. And one of the great lessons I learned from getting a MacArthur Award was I met the MacArturos, which is a group of Latino MacArthur winners that came together to do community service in the Latino barrios. And I learned so much from sitting next to a performance artist and labor organizer and geneticist and an anthropologist. And I realized, I got to stop hanging around with just writers. I need more diversity if I want solutions to my problems. So I will suggest that for the museums that they should invite, Erica, that young student, and a brain surgeon, and a street cleaner, and just a donut maker. You just get so many wonderful ideas because I don't know everything, but I know together with everyone else, we know almost everything. So that's my suggestion. Let me wrap up here. Now, next week, I will be going to 3 museums in nearby Guanajuato, only a few kilometers from where my grandparents, the parents of Vera Cisneros, fled their village and migrated north 100 years ago. The purpose of my trip is to deliver a lecture for the Mexican photographer Flor Garduño's exhibit at the Instituto Estatal de la Cultura. Flor is dragging me to the Mummy Museum earlier in the day, but although I promised to accompany her, I'm not going in. Something about those pobre infelices having to work after death and never resting in peace breaks my heart. And anyway, I've already been there twice. And also, I can't bear to see what frightens me the most. No, not the mummies, but the mummies' clothes and shoes. Why is this so creepy? My plan is to wait outside and interview the guards about any ghost sightings because museum guards always have plenty of stories. The name Guanajuato is derived from the Purépecha word Guanajuato, which translates as the mountainous place of frogs. Now, this is very curious because Guanajuato is the birthplace of artist Diego Rivera, and he looked like both a mountain and a frog, don't you think? Diego was a big fan of Hermenegildo Bustos, a native Guanajuato portrait painter who painted in the mid-19th century. And these extraordinary Bustos portraits are some of the finest at capturing a time and place as amazing as the mummy portraits of Fayum. And if you ever get anywhere near Guanajuato, I recommend you go to the Olga Costa Museum. Olga Costa was an artist too, a nationalized Mexican artist, but of German origin and a contemporary of Diego. And her private collection has a few Bustos portraits, but the major cachet is housed in the historic La Lóndiga. And I can never remember that name without thinking of La Albóndiga, the meatball, so that's a good way to remember it. La Albóndiga. Both the Olga Costa and La Albóndiga are on my agenda next week to revisit the Bustos portraits, whose images of Guanajuato citizens is remarkably relevant today. Because when I moved here to San Miguel, I kept noticing that everyone looked like a walking Hermenegildo Bustos portrait. And when I found out Bustos was from this region, pues no wonder that people have the same DNA. Well, time does not allow me to go on forever with these museum musings, so I may expand and add photos when I finally publish this essay. I am, as you can tell, very fond of museums that focus on the work of women. Back in the mid-90s, I read a book that changed me, Women's Work, The First 20,000 Years, Women, Cloth, and Society in Early Times, by archaeologist Elizabeth Wayland Barber. She mentions how the linen wrappings of the mummies had been discarded in previous times and how essential that is now because it displays the fine weaving work of women. It got me thinking about textiles and the contributions of women that has been overlooked throughout the ages. Sometimes what I missed was more important than what I saw. I have mentioned some museums that left me emocionada, and I think it would be clever to create a museum of emotions, but perhaps these already exist, as the Holocaust Museum and the museums of intolerance already do, drawing forth our emotions. Some museums I'd like to see, Museum of Shame. We are shaped as much by our errors as well as our accolades as individuals and as nations. And sometimes our errors are even more important in shaping us into who we ultimately are. I would like to see nations admit their guilt about dropping atomic bombs or creating concentration camps for their own citizens or creating concentration camps on the border disguised as refugee centers or forgetting genocide in the name of national expansion. I would like to see a museum of regret and apology. But maybe that's what's happening already with ways in which we see history and admit it as a continuum, a museum of amnesia and remembering. I want to bring this essay back to my mother. She is calling me now for sure. The intuitive phone is ringing and ringing. She wants me to make sure I mention, I am me, thanks to her. So when I pick up and she asks, what? I will have to say, you, that's what. Thanks and good lucky.
Great presentation, Sandra, as always. I know people are applauding wherever they're at. You are such a great storyteller. Make sure you get a copy of the chat comments. They are so fantastic. They're hilarious. Also approving of your presentation, which was really a great presentation. And Sandra,
I had some more comments. I had more. I mentioned your museum, but I wanted to keep this short. And when we publish it, I can add what I dropped out.
You have been a great support of my museum, our museum, so I appreciate it tremendously. You know, this past year and 3 months have been unbelievable. I mean, all the events that have happened. And, museums are, conservative institutions who don't get involved in social issues. In fact, I remember if you heard someone who would speak about social issues, people say, not in this place. This is not for us. We're museums. Can museums change? Will they change and be part of trying to deal with issues that our society faces? What do you think about them?
It depends on who runs the museum. No? You know,
Yeah.
I think if we see that diversity in in all, not just the people taking the tickets and cleaning the floors, if we see that diversity in places of power, then I think, yeah, they're going to change. And I think we're lucky to be living in a time in which we're witnessing great change that we haven't seen since, like, you and I were growing up in the 60s. It's this total upheaval. It's wonderful. You know, it's frightening and wonderful. It's like that Chinese blessing curse, you know, may you live in interesting times. We are living in interesting times. And the fact that, you know, you are the director of the museum, that's pretty amazing. You know, I'm sure you didn't think you'd be a museum director when you were a kid, right?
Never. And with other museums you mentioned, those were my museums too.
Right.
And I have a soft spot for all of them. I really do.
Yeah.
I have something else I want to talk to you about, and that's, your writing. When did you really feel I'm going to make this my life's work? What was the point where you said, come hell or high water, I'm going to be a writer?
You know, I always did, even very young, you know, high school maybe, but I didn't think I'd make a big splash. I just thought I would do it on the weekends and summers. I thought I was going to be a high school teacher and write on my time off. So I always wrote. I always thought I was going to write. Is that bell? Is that like a
No,
fire
no,
bell?
no.
I can
Keep
ignore it.
going.
Okay.
Keep going.
Well, you know, always. And the funny thing is, children all love to draw. And I think before I knew how to hold a pencil that I was an artist. We all start as artists. And as Pablo Picasso says, why do we stop? I think there's something wrong with our education that we stop, because art is so essential to transforming us and making us more human and giving ourselves a cleansing so that we don't go ballistic and shoot a classroom. You know, that's why we need art, to check in on our hearts and transform our demons to light. So I was very lucky that I transformed that artist self that didn't know how to read or write, and then it, you know, to writing. And I kept the art and the writing going. I still draw and I still, of course, write. So, you know, it was always there. It was my great love. I needed it. I need it now, you know, or I would go ballistic. It keeps me from having, literally from having deep depressions. So I was lucky to know that I was an artist, even though I never thought I'd make my money from. I always had a white parachute, and I advise that to young artists. Make sure that you're not homeless and that you can afford to take care of yourself. Earn your own money.
So what advice would you give to a writer? I've had so many people who knew I was going to be part of this presentation say, ask her, please, 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 I want to write, but I've never done it. I write papers, but I've never tried to write a book. What advice would you give somebody?
All right. Well, first, there's two things. Everybody can write, but not everybody's a writer. So you have to decide, you know, maybe I'll try it and I won't be a professional writer, but I need to write. And I would encourage you, just like everybody can dance, but I don't want to see everybody on stage, you know, right? Only some people are professionals, and that's fine. We all need it for healing. So I would recommend everybody, you know, all you need is a pen or pencil and a notebook. That's cheaper than a computer. You don't need a computer. You know, you just need that, something to write on, anything. And, you know, you don't need to keep your writing, but you need to write. So I always recommend, you know, that you write as if no one's going to see what you write. And if you don't have privacy, if you lived in a house without doors, like my rooms and my apartments, you can tear it up. It's more important to write it and get it out rather than to keep it. You can eat it, you can burn it, but it's not about publishing. It's about transforming yourself from things you keep inside, and write about the things you wish you could forget. Write about what you wish you could forget, because the things that hold us and censor us are the most powerful stories we will have to tell. And we need to tell them because our mental well-being depends on it. So you may have to write about the same thing over and over again your whole life. And sometimes as writers, we're writing the same story over and over, but we're getting closer to the target. So imagine you're only speaking to the one person who can see you in your pajamas. No one's going to read it. And, you know, you don't have to keep it. It's important, right? If you're going to become a professional writer, and this is professional anything, earn your own money, as I said. Control your fertility. Your fertility disability does not control you. This is 2021, it's not 1821. No excuses. And third, solitude is sacred because, a lot of young people think, oh, I don't have a date, I don't have friends. Well, the universe is giving you a gift of taking care and nurturing you. And artists need big doses of solitude for us to become great. And if you are serious about becoming a writer, earn your own money, and it probably won't be with your art. Control your fertility because you don't want to be knocked out of your brilliant career. And 3, take advantage of being alone because that's going to create the best art.
Sandra, this, in the chat room, which is very interesting seeing these chats, one of the terms that keeps coming up is storytelling. And whenever everybody writes about you or talks about the term storytelling comes out, is there a difference between that and being a writer? I mean, what's the difference? I mean, why do you get the term storyteller so often when people write about you?
I think because I perform my stories out loud, and I collect my stories from oral storytellers. A lot of the stories I hear, I've heard them out loud, and I'm also channeling speakers, and so I think maybe that's it, because I do feel my work needs to be read out loud, and my books are all on audio, ones that are in English I record myself. And I think maybe that's it, but you'd have to ask my readers. No, I can't know everything.
There are probably a few people out there who work as, librarians, and you always talk about libraries, that they played a role in your life as well. And
yes, because Sunday was the
about that as
museum.
well.
Sundays was museums, but Saturday was the library. And my
How much-
mom.
Okay,
And my mom.
tell us more about that if you can.
Well, my mom, she was I think she was a frustrated artist, and she loved going to the museums on Sunday, as I've said, but Saturdays she went to the library to take out books herself. And, and she would say, go over there, leave me alone for a little while. And, she just needed some alone time badly. Can you imagine, with 7 kids? So we got to like going to the library. Some of us liked it more than others. And, that practice is, how my mother planted the seeds for reading in all of us, because we saw her reading, and then we would come back with our big stack of books and crawl into bed with her, and she would read her own books and we'd read all our own books too. But it was so nice to be snuggled up next to your mom in quiet time like that. That was important.
Can you be a bruja and try to predict where this country will be in the next 10 years?
Try to predict. I didn't hear the second part, Carla.
Can you be a bruja and try to predict where the United States is going to be in 10 years?
Uy, uy, uy.
Bruja's like a witch.
I don't know where we will be in 10 years. I know one thing, that we're going to have a lot more Latino voices born in the U.S. Writing, because I can see the younger writers coming up already, some great young writers in in all the genres, and I'm very excited about that. So I just know that when you go to the library, there'll be a lot more Latino names on the shelf.
Okay. Another thing people wanted me to ask you was, what project are you working on at the moment? Is there a book in the future? Or what's happening?
Well, I'm first I had to wrestle the Lucha Libre, this essay that I just delivered, which I'm exhausted. And now I'll be working on the galleys for, the galleys are the pages that are printed of a book before it becomes a book. I'm having the last paso, the last pass of correcting my forthcoming book, which is Martita, I Remember You. It's also a publication in English and Spanish. You flip it over and it's in Spanish. Martita Te Recuerdo, which will be out September 7th. And I don't have a Chicago presentation, but maybe if we could find a good space, I would ask my agent if I could come. Okay?
Sandra's met so many times at the museum. She really has.
I know, but then we have to turn people away, and it makes me feel sad. So, if there's some bigger space and someone wants to donate to the Mexican...
We'll find a place for you. We'll find a place for
All right, I'll talk to my agent today and say, all right.
No ifs and ands about that. We'll find a place for you. But one thing you mentioned about the fact that you write is that you have to be alone and have the solitude. Have you missed out on anything? Have you missed out on anything that you regret?
Oh, well, I missed out on having children, but I took care of my niece when she was 1 month old till she was like 4 months. So I know how much work that is. And I don't regret it. I just decided after taking care of my niece and being her full-time nanny, I can't create art and have a baby. I cannot. Maybe some women can. I can't because I was a single woman and I picked the worst partners that were never going to stick around and help me. And I knew that if I had children, I would have to move back under my father's roof. And I fought too hard for independence to do that. So I'm just the tia. I don't have children. And also a lot of, sometimes when you're a writer, you can't keep a relationship going because your partner will feel jealous of your success. They say they don't, but they do. Or you may pick an artist and they're living under their headsets and you're in your world and you really aren't connecting, as has happened sometimes with me. So sometimes you can't have children, you can't have a partner, but that doesn't mean your life is dull and unexciting. I feel like I've lived a very full life. And now I live in my convent, what I call my convent of one, and I'm very happy and love it. And I receive lots of love from the universe, from many, many people and beings. I don't feel I'm missed out. Actually, I'm very grateful for all of the mistakes I made. You have to make mistakes because the mistakes teach you more than the positive things. I think they haunt me. So I feel grateful for all the good and bad things that happened that allowed me to be who I am now at 66. Mm-hmm.
Sandra, have you gone back ever, probably, just asking, to your old neighborhood and walk around and just
Carlos, I was just there 2 weeks ago. I came in, I swept in. I hadn't seen my family in 2 years, and I stayed in my old neighborhood. And I was telling everyone, I'm in the intersection of this is your life, because my high school was a few blocks away. My last apartment, the original space where House on Mango Street was written about, it was so much my life. And I just walked the blocks. I saw Diana Solis. She took pictures of me in my old neighborhood. It was so great. And that's the only artist I saw was Diana Solis, because it really was a
great artist.
My family. Yeah, great Diana Solis. I had a blast, talked about old times. She's a great photographer who took pictures of me that you now see in my books. And so it was, it was spiritual and heartbreaking because, it was so nice to see, that the neighborhood had a nice library and beautiful Highline Walk and beautiful Wicker Park now. Why couldn't the city give us that when we lived there? Why do we have to wait until people of lighter color move in to get city services? Didn't we deserve it too? And that broke my heart. And I thought, why does Chicago sigue siendo así tan malo? Malo siempre with the poor. It's always been like that since, the beginning, probably since the French traders came and usurped, the Indian lands. I don't know. That makes me sad when I go back. My family can't afford to live in the city. They have to live on outer edges and very long voyage to the city center and to the museums and so forth.
Someone who talks to, a bunch of school groups, it's interesting to hear how many of them talk about the awful word, violence. And the young lady who today was the one who introduced you, she mentioned violence. How can we solve this? Is it solvable? We're just stuck with it.
I don't think we're asking the people who could most solve it. It's always coming from up down. And, I think when you think of the work that poet Luis Rodriguez has done with, gang members and with community members, there are a lot of community leaders that are not involved in resolving the gang violence, and they should be. They're the experts. That's about that diversity that I was talking about, that we can't know everything by ourselves, that we need everyone in our community, and it must be as diverse as possible to come to solutions, whether it's what a museum should be or what a neighborhood should be. Don't you think?
If you could change one thing about schools, what would you change? Several things if you want, but at least one thing that you think that you can do to change schools, to have more of an impact on our young people.
I think it would be very important to remember that some children don't learn in a linear fashion, like artists. And, I thought I was stupid and didn't speak So I think it's important to recognize there are different ways of learning, that some artists leap and do intuitive things, and that's okay. I think that if I had known that, I wouldn't have had such low self-esteem when I was in school. I think it's important to have the arts in the schools and to teach girls math and science in a better way. I don't know anything. And, I just feel like there's these pockets in my education that really got lost. And I just feel that we need art to save us from violence, and we need also to teach peaceful conflict resolution. The models we have for resolution of conflict is always shown in film, as in TV, as violent, and in music, violence. And even like powerful women. What is a powerful woman? It's one who shakes her booty and has a big booty. That's our examples of power in our popular culture. And that made me very sad. I don't want to be famous for having a big butt. And then you go on television, that's their heroes, ladies who have like a horse's butt. That's scary and sad. So I think we need to educate our young people to other ways of power, other ways of resolving conflict, and other heroes other than what television and pop culture feeds us. It's triste when I see young women and they think being a powerful woman is like posing for porn magazine. No, pobrecitas. So I think there's a gap that we need to bring powerful women into the schools. I remember I used to come into that public school by you, Carlos, my longtime class friend. Zola Garcia was the principal. What a blast I had at that school. I remember she made me see every single class. I was so tired. And she said, "Oh, Sandra, could you please come and see the kindergartners?" I was like, "No, I'm so tired. They're the ones that sap your energy the most." She said, "Oh, please, they've been waiting, please." I was like, "Oh, no, I got to go see the kindergartners." I went in there. It was the last class. I was fatigada, exhausted. And those little children were all jumping around. They were all like bouncing like atoms in the room. And I came in, I was a little bit afraid. And I said, "What am I going to do with these kids?" And I said, "Oh, would you like to learn how to meditate like a writer?" "Yes!" I said, "Okay, I'm going to teach you how to meditate." And I taught them, and they had never done this before, meditate with little children. I taught them how to do it. I said, "Okay, we're going to be real quiet. And I want you to imagine your mother and father and the sun smiling down at you. And I want you to take the rays of that sun and put it in your heart. When you in-breath, when you exhale, send that light back. Do it again." And the whole energy in the room changed. And that was the best class I ever taught. Almost missed it. So you see, sometimes these challenges, and I think we can teach children how to meditate, to calm down, because it's just channeling your heart with love. That's all meditation is, coming to some place of shining that love out, and inhaling that love and cleaning and sending it out. And I didn't know I could do that. So thank Zoila Garcia, whose spirit is here. She passed away. Gracias.
Sandra, you're just an amazing individual. If people don't know you, they've missed out. You really are a joy, a treat.
Well, I'm going to try to come to Chicago for Thanksgiving. Maybe we can do it the day after Thanksgiving. What do you say?
Good. Sounds good. We'll do it. And I have a question for you. Who's the next Sandra Cisneros out there? Who's a young writer out there who really impresses you, who's not been successful, financially yet, but you think has super talent? Who's out there, do you think?
Oh, my goodness.
These are not easy questions. Not easy question. I know.
Well, that's not an easy, because there's so many good ones.
Name a few if you can. So
Well,
we can start reading
I'm
them.
going to name a young gay man, Joe Jimenez. He's really good.
Where's Joe from?
San Antonio, Texas. And I'm also going to mention another, Erica Sanchez, right there in Chicago. She's really good.
He's fantastic.
And there's others that are coming up that are younger that I've been looking and reading their books. And, un tambache. And I'm so glad there's like a whole generation all coming up. I'm very impressed. Jaime Cortez, who's got a book coming out in August, gay writer, Gordo. Can't forget that title. Super. Love it. So there's a lot of young writers, a lot of gay writers. And I love that they're coming up. And writing with a lot of heart and honesty and strength. So great.
We're almost out of time, but just one quick more question. Are you hopeful about the future? Is there
Yeah.
hope when you think of the USA? Is there hope?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, even though it's more violent than Mexico, and I'm afraid to come into the United States, I have to say, it's scary to come into the United States. But you know what? I won't believe all the news reports of all the violence in the United States. I know there's some safe and beautiful things happening that don't make the news. And, you know, one of the great and wonderful things and improvement is the museums in the barrio, like your museum. It's free every day. You know, that's wonderful. And, you know, a lot of times people go into museums to get out of the heat or get out of the cold, but then they learn something when they're meandering in there. And, you know, that happened to us as kids. We were all meanders, and look where we are today. So bravo to museums that are in communities of color. And I think that's a great change.
All right. I think it's 1:30. Are they going to, or should we keep talking? I'm not getting any signals, so.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you,
Carlos,
Sandra,
thank
for
you.
that wonderful, engaging presentation and conversation. And thank you especially for the stories. We love the stories.
Thank you. My mother thanks you.
Okay,
Sandra's the best, the best.
we will now have a 30-minute break during which we will encourage our attendees to visit our exhibitors in the virtual expo hall, to attend our solutions and tech talks, or to explore our poster hall. Concurrent sessions will begin at 2 p.m. Central Time. Please refer to the full program for more information about today's schedule, and we will see you again on tomorrow at 12:30 Central Time for our next Elevate Stage session.